Most people have grown attached to certain movies while growing up and even years later are ready to argue that those specific movies are the best thing that they've ever lived to see and nothing else will ever come equal to them. And I'm no different. I think I've seen How to Train a Dragon as a yearly event since I was however young I was when the first one came out. And I'm heavily biased towards saying that it's just amazing. From the colors, the sound, the character development, the attention to detail, it's just... Even when I saw the third one and I was around 20, I cried at the end of the movie. Before I start, if you're wondering if this is a video where I'm going to be glazing the heck out of the characters writing in DreamWorks How to Train a Dragon, you're 100% right. I've read more into this in the forums and the other known writer blogs, and they claim that the movie is just a childish thing with the average plot and development, but as we all know, everybody's entitled to their own wrong opinion. Spoilers ahead. Think about How to Train a Dragon for a second. The first time you saw it, you don't just remember Hiccup or Toothless, but you can easily remember Astrid, Stoick, Fishlegs, Snotlout, Ruffnut and Tuffnut, or even the little critters that wander around and just do dumb stuff. They're written in such a way in which they make sense to be in the movies, and they're just amazing. Unlike some other movies which I also enjoyed, but somehow had no clue about most characters and their relevance because we were not even offered a couple of lines of text to generate at least a superficial care for them, the crazy thing is that the movie does not stop to explain them. It doesn't give excessive monologue, flashbacks, or heavy exposition. Imagine, they're explained so well that even my wife doesn't have to ask me every minute, "Who's this guy?" This trilogy's approach to character introduction is simple yet powerful. Every character is introduced as a response to the world they fit in. Instead of telling us who the characters are with wild stop-motion framing, they show us what their functions are within the Viking culture via what they do and how they do it. This is pretty much an extension of Muki's argument. Characters revealed through behavior under pressure. And How to Train a Dragon takes this notion and pushes it onto multiple layers: cultural, social, and physical, and lets the characters' reactions do the work. The movie has at its core the protagonist, Hiccup, and his musketeers that are venturing into a world of maniac dragons that actually happen to be rather playful and tameable. This is the premise to their story. The leader of the little group is Hiccup, a character that's introduced as a failure for the world he belongs to. He's physically small in a culture of strength, he invents instead of fighting, and he hesitates where others will just charge ahead. Yet, the film doesn't just pause and have an ominous voice saying, "Hiccup is different." It lets the Viking culture reject him in real time. But if you're introduced to such a puny little fella, where do we root for him? Lisa Kron, in Wired for Story, says that we empathize with characters when we quickly understand what they care about and what threatens that value. In Hiccup's case, the balance between a murderous life of a Viking versus his desire to be a creator, inventor, and generally being a thinker more than a... That's pretty much how we start rooting for him from the get-go. He's the outcast with a vision. No. Vikings wouldn't just randomly allow weaklings amongst them, no. It just happens for Stoick to be the leader of the entire tribe and Hiccup's father, therefore giving Hiccup a bit of a preferential treatment. Now, being the son of an ultra-pure Viking has its perks and its deficits. Stoick is the embodiment of the Viking values and ideology. He's loud, physically imposing, decisive, emotionally closed, and hell of a barrier for Hiccup's desire to be different. In the 7 basic plots, Christopher Booker notes that strong characters often function as value anchors. They represent what the world expects the hero to be. Stoick for How to Train a Dragon is just like Morpheus for the Matrix world. Stoick is not cruel, he's consistent in his Viking values, and this consistency creates tension and a control to Hiccup's innovative approach to life. With this father-son dynamic somewhat established, we also have the usual a love situation. This is Astrid. She's introduced through efficiency. She's got precise movement, makes direct eye contact, doesn't waste a word, and doesn't show any insecurities. She's basically the Viking. Astrid is a curious one, because she's the one Hiccup fancies, but also the one that's the embodiment of a true Viking. But a true Viking would not fall for a puny little fella, would she? Well, this is where the dynamic gets interesting. Throughout the movies, her skepticism for Hiccup's action feels earned, and so does the respect. As McKee said, the more competent the character is, the more meaningful their choices become. And that's how we get to see, in the young group of Vikings, Hiccup's progression, through either self or external validation. Astrid's arc works because it's the middle ground between the adult Viking and playful child, so to speak. So her approval and actions are not automatic, they're conditional. To this moment, we've introduced the funny triad of true-blooded and an innovator. So, How do we bridge this gap? Hiccup believed that there's other ways around dragons besides killing, and during his educational ventures, there's very little information about night furies. And guess what? He captures and tames a night fury. With this in mind, we have Toothless, a dialogue-free character that only acts with its actions. From the beginning, it's a display of curiosity and aggression, playfulness and trust, fear and loyalty. And the way Toothless moves, acts and reacts reproduce these traits to the minute detail. One glimpse is enough for one to understand how the character feels in the moment, and that's just fantastic, allowing the audience to connect the dots on their own, not giving them instructions like they're Toothless. The way Toothless is built is through what animation theory calls incremental trust building. Ghoshal also backs this up in Storytelling Animal by stating that we bond with characters when we can predict their behaviors and then watch it evolve. The behavior of Toothless evolves rapidly, and that's why the bond feels real. So real to the point where, when I was in my I want to get a tattoo phase, I was gonna plop this tattoo on my forearm. Childish, but yeah, I might get back that idea. Now, to migrate back to our voice using subheroes. We have Fish Legs and Snout Loud, Tuffnut and Ruffnut. These are some contrasting elements. Some are curious without power, and the others are power without curiosity. They're not overshadowing the main trio at any point, Hiccup, Toothless and Astrid, but as Prob mentions, not all characters need to exist within a complex realm, they just exist to contrast the hero. Each of these reflect a path that Hiccup could take, but rejects. And you got Ruffnut and Tuffnut, characters without backstory, exposition, or any relevant clue besides their full personalities. They interrupt each other, they finish each other's thoughts incorrectly, they argue while agreeing, their confidence is mismatched with their competence. But how comes they work? Because although they are two separate characters, they embody one ecosystem. Just like two-headed entities in other video games or books, you have two possible outcomes when it comes to lines and interpretation from one character, a hive mind, or more like a mismatched hive mind. These two are the embodiment of McKee's story principle. Character is revealed through behavior under pressure, and the twins' pressure response is always the same, tension into comedy and confusion. These two, although random at most times, serve quite some role. They add tone control by regulating tension moments so the film can stay intense without getting to a heavy point. It's a cartoon at the end of the day. They add world texture so Burke doesn't feel like it's just staged for four characters that all have the perfect lines calibrated and calculated for the script, and help with creating even more contrast to Hiccup and Astrid, the other pair we have in the movie. Now, I began maybe by hyper-hyping How to Train a Dragon, and maybe you were expecting some 5-dimensional analysis of depth and whatnot, but it's not that deep. The characters are not special because they're deep, but because they're clear and developed just as much as they needed to be developed to make sense. Pixar and DreamWorks have these principles as design. Clarity creates empathy, complexity comes later, and How to Train a Dragon gets the job done in this way. That's why we care. When a story shows us how a character fits or doesn't into the world, we instinctively start painting a picture in our heads. And once we start to pinpoint to those things, it becomes quite easy to see why we just don't care about many other movies and their characters. All that being said, man, I love How to Train a Dragon. Until we meet again.